Okay, boys and girls, so I hope that you did great in your mock exam about the Greeks. Remember, this is basically a review going from the Western hunter-gatherers all the way to uh, the empire of Alexander the Great, and how after his death the empire was divided between his generals. So now we're going to change the point of view that we are using so far. So far, we have been studying the way of social organization of these societies. We have been focusing on how they are organized and how they are organizing themselves in order to fight others, to become stronger, and so on. But now we're going to study another way of organization, and this is not a way of organization of people, but a way of organization of the mind, of the ideas. And for this, we're going to retake some of the topics that we studied that were myths and philosophy. So let's start with myths. And if you remember here, we have the myth of the Minotaur that is related to the Minoan society. Remember that some people used to believe that that the palace of Knossos is actually the palace of King Minos. Why? Because they did not only find a lot of representations of bulls, but they also found a maze underneath the palace. And remember that the myth of the Minotaur includes this maze that is built in order to control and to keep locked down this beast that was the Minotaur, this man-eating beast. So, what is a myth? Well, first of all, remember that a myth is a story. And this story is going to be shared by a society. So it is not an individual story. It is a story that many people believe in, that a whole society shares, or at least a fraction of the society. But it is not individual, it is collective. Now, the content of this story is not historical. This is what is very important. This is the most important part that we must understand here. Myths are not history. And remember that I told you that there is even a researcher in the National Institute of Anthropology and History that uses myths in order to do history. And absolutely every single researcher other than him is like, dude, come on, you simply cannot use myths in order to do history. Why? Because myths are not historical, they are mythological. And I know that that may sound very obvious, but what does that mean? What do I mean when I say that myths are mythological, not historical? Well, mythological means that we should not be paying attention to the story that they are telling. The story is not important because the story is not true. And even if it contains small parts of true, those small parts are not trying to really make a historical review of things or a historical reference. Even if there are small parts that actually happen, those parts are in reference to the logic that the myth is trying to teach us. Sorry. So remember, what we should be paying attention to is not to the story, but to the logic of the myth. Why? Because the function of the myth is to teach a society how to think. And the myths are going to teach societies how to think by showing and by teaching this logic that they are transmitting. Through the story, yes, but the story itself is not important. What is important is the logic that the story displays. So, what is this logic going to do? Well, it is going to allow societies to oppose ideas. Let's have an example here. If you remember the myth of the Minotaur, the Minotaur was defeated by Theseus. So Theseus, and these two dots here, this semicolon, mean in the context of mythological analysis, it means is to. So Theseus is to the Minotaur, and what do you think that is the relation between Theseus and the Minotaur? Well, they are opposed to each other, right? Theseus is a human, he is a very strong young man, while the Minotaur is an unnatural creature, right? He is basically a monster. So they are opposed to each other. Now, the meaning of one semicolon means is two, but in the context of mythological analysis, when we have two semicolons, this means what? And again, we are going to have one semicolon here, so that means is two. So if we read it all together, it says, Theseus is to the Minotaur what Hero is to Bilian. So Theseus is the hero and the Minotaur is the villain. That seems pretty obvious, but these oppositions are going to teach this whole society how to think. Why? Because they can keep opposing ideas through this myth as saying, well, Theseus was good, while the Minotaur was bad, right? So we have another opposition. Not only hero is to villain, but now we have what goodness is to bad, right? We also have, well, Theseus was a human being, a natural entity, while the Minotaur was a monster. So we have natural to supernatural. Natural is to Theseus what supernatural is to Minotaur. So they oppose each other. And this is very important because the society can order their whole universe by using this logic. Black is to white, what up is to down. Right is to left, what woman is to men. Man is to woman, what rulers are to serfs. Freedom is to slavery, what hero is to villain. So basically they are going to be able to set in order their whole reality by opposing these ideas. And again, I know that you do not think that I make everything that I teach you up, but remember that these were the, let's say, the discoveries, or this is the proposition that some of the most famous and most important researchers on mythology have come up with. Basically, the French school led by Claude Lévi-Strauss. Like the jeans. Lévi-Strauss. So yes, I am not making this up, right? So what are the myths in, well, finally, like to summarize, to come to a conclusion? Well, the myth is a way to organize thinking and order and understand the world. Why? Well, because if I see something that I have never seen before, I can break it down into the logic of the myths that I already know and I can understand it. This is a very simple example. During the Second World War, there were several battles in the South Pacific Ocean, like the Solomon Islands near New Guinea, and these are basically battles in which the United States and Japan are fighting between each other, right, for the control of the Pacific Ocean. Now, something that was pretty relevant in fights in the Second World War, and mainly in the war that was led in the Pacific Ocean by these two countries, were airplanes. Airplanes were the centerpiece of the Pacific War. But in all these islands, and we have already studied some of these tribes, right? Like in New Guinea, the Yatmul, the ones that were cannibals, do you remember? In these islands, of course, these tribes have never seen an airplane. But now they are seeing a lot of airplanes, and these airplanes are shooting each other, right? They have machine guns, and they are shooting each other. So how are these tribes going to understand what they are seeing? Like imagine, you live in your island, you have never seen white people in your life, and suddenly you see airplanes flying above you, shooting each other. What are you going to think? Well, this is a very nice example because what they did is that they integrated these airplanes into their mythology. And they were able to say that they were birds that came from the gods and that they would spit fire. The bullets were fire. So This is a really nice passage. Why? Because it really allows you to understand how mythology is going to allow you to understand not only the world that you know, but also things of the world that you have never encountered before. Yes, and the way in which it allows you to do it is through oppositions. Now you can say that there are birds that you know, and these birds are not made out of metal and they do not spit fire. And there are birds that you do not know that are made out of metal and that spit fire. So there are natural birds as opposed to supernatural birds. And these airplanes of the Second World War would obviously be classified as supernatural birds as opposed to natural birds. So it is the same logic that we are seeing here. Now, going towards philosophy. Philosophy is obviously another way to organize thinking, right? So, what is philosophy? Philosophy, like the word, remember that we are always studying the meaning of the words, and in order to understand the meaning of the words, what we have to do is to divide the word, right? So, philos means love, and Sophie, of course, this letter is being integrated, and Sophie means knowledge. So, love for knowledge. Philosophy means love for knowledge. And what is philosophy? Well, philosophy are basically systems of thought that are going to allow us to organize idea and research particular problems. So instead of just wondering about the origin of things, we're going to research this problem in an organized way through a system of thought. So, when we're speaking about Greek philosophy, we usually divide it between the pre-Socratic philosophers, so that means the philosophers that came before Socrates, and the Socratic philosophers, so that is the philosophers, basically Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Here there is a picture of a statue of Aristotle. Now, you have actually studied pretty nice pre-Socratic philosophy, right? Do you remember that we even had a debate? Well, we're going to go back to that. Speaking about pre-Socratic philosophy, remember that there is a very important limitation here. The sources that we have to speak about pre-Socratic philosophy are doxographic sources. What does that mean? That means that what we have is a collection of ideas that are supposed to come from these authors, but we really do not have the original books of these authors. We are taking collections of thoughts from other authors. For example, Aristotle says in one of his books that Thales thinks that the origin of everything is water. So, do we have any book or any writing saying that Thales, or where Thales actually wrote that the origin of everything was water? No. Everything we have for every single one of these philosophers is just the things that we have in the doxography, that is indirect doxography. So they are things that other people say that these philosophers said, but we do not have anything directly from this philosopher. Now, we said that philosophy was a way to research particular problems, right? Systems to organize idea and research particular problems. What is the particular problem that pre-Socratic philosophy is going to research? Well, the origin of everything. What is very interesting is that before this Socratic and pre-Socratic philosophers, the explanation for everything were the gods, right? It is the doing of Zeus, it is the doing of Athena, it is the doing of Ares, it is the doing of Hera, right? But starting with philosophers, they are going to wonder about the origin of things much beyond gods. They are going to try to find another origin for things. So we have several schools of pre-Socratic philosophy, and really I love this map because you can see the places where they were from. For example, in your debate, some of you were assuming the ideas of Parmenides, right? So Parmenides was from Elea, that is this city in southern Italy, very close to Capua, right? Now, some others of you, the other half of the class, was adopting Heraclitus' ideas. And remember that these ideas opposed to each other. So Heraclitus was from Ephesus, and Ephesus is here in Minor Asia. So they are pretty far from each other, right? And none of them are actually in mainland Greece. Remember that mainland Greece is here. Which philosophers actually were from mainland Greece? Were Plato and Socrates. Socrates was supposed to be Plato's teacher, and Socrates was assassinated due to his very bad influences on young people because he was teaching them how to think. And not only in that society, in our society too, trying to teach young people how to think may be very bad for some people, right? So they basically killed Socrates. Um, but Aristotle, that was the student of Plato, he was here from Stagira, and this is north of Greece, right? So we're going to go back to these philosophers later, but I really love this map because we can really know where they were from, right? Give me a sec, let me erase it to go back to our pre-Socratic philosophers. So we have the school of the Militians, and the school of the Militians, and here you have it, from Mileto, here, is going to be made up of Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. And they're going to have different ideas of what is the origin of everything. Thales is going to believe that the origin of everything was water. Anaximander is going to believe that the origin of everything was the apeiron. And the apeiron is this very interesting principle based on the universe in equilibrium. Basically, like if something gets hot, the universe and the apeiron is going to balance things out, and there is going to be something that gets cold in order to balance this thing that is getting hot. If someone is if someone is being born, then someone is going to die to balance this thing. So it is very interesting because the apeiron is this principle of setting things into equilibrium by doing the opposite thing, right? If someone dies, then someone is going to be born. If something gets hot, then something is going to get cold, right? The idea is that through oppositions, the apeiron is going to be balancing things out. And finally, Anaximenes, and this one I like a lot, thought that air was the origin of everything and that everything was made up of air. So how air? Well, he thought that that air had different thicknesses. So very thin air, well, was just air, the gas that we know. But very thick air could become solid and could be making up our own bodies. So he thought that there were different thicknesses of air and that those were going to be setting basically apart one air of another air, yes, but everything is going to be made up of air. But some of the things are going to be made up of thicker air, and those are the solid things, and some things are going to be made up of thinner air, and those are, well, basically the gases, and the in-between state would be water, right? Solid, liquid, and gas. Then the Pythagoreans. This one is great because everybody thinks that Pythagoras was the author of the theorem of Pythagoras, but he actually wasn't. And how can we know that? Well, because in the original doxography, that is the oldest doxography, the one that Plato and Aristotle are writing, there is absolutely no mention about the theorem. The theorem was attributed to Pythagoras several centuries after. So we can know that there was a moment in which people started attributing the theorem to Pythagoras, but it was several centuries after his death. The original doxography, the one that was closest to him in time, does not mention the Pythagoras theorem. But what is the origin of everything according to the Pythagoreans? The number. But not the number in the way that we think nowadays about the number, but the number like in a more mystical way. Like if you understand the number behind reality, then you can modify reality through numbers. It is like magic, right? It is a much more mystical way to look at numbers. Like reality is made out of numbers. So if we can find the rules behind these numbers, then we can modify reality. It was quite a mystical school in the beginning. Then they began being more and more, let's say, scientific, but not quite, right? Because sciences are something of the 18th and 19th century, basically, well, 17th and 18th century, but let's say more scientific. Then the Ephesians. This one is great. Heraclitus. Remember that Heraclitus, and you have this debate, Heraclitus is saying that everything is changing, and there is this very famous phrase of him saying that you cannot bathe 2 times on the same river because every single time that you get into that river, the waters have already changed. And the only thing that remains is the idea, the name river, but the river itself is always changing because the waters are always flowing. And basically, for him, reality was always like that. So he's thinking that fire is the origin of everything. And well, philosophers debate that fire is basically a representation of change within the thought of Heraclitus. Then the Eleatic philosopher, and here we have Parmenides. So again, look how funny is the distance between them. Heraclitus is in Minor Asia, and Parmenides is here in southern Italy. And Parmenides, if you remember, is debating the idea, absolutely the opposite idea to Heraclitus. Parmenides is saying that nothing changes, that things either are or are not. And if things are, that means that they are not becoming. If they were becoming, then that means that things still are not. And Parmenides is saying, well, I cannot assert not being. I can only speak about being. So there is only to be. There does not exist not to be. And within not to be, there is becoming. And change means becoming, that you are becoming something else. So you either are or you are not, but you are certainly not changing. You are not becoming. So things are not changing. Things are always the same because they are. If they were changing, then they wouldn't be. Right? I know that that is pretty deep, but you already debated these ideas in class, and you really had a very nice participation in this debate. I congratulate you again. And finally, the atomists are going to be discussing the idea that, and this is Democritus, this is very important, in your chemistry classes they're going to be asking you this. Democritus is going to have the idea that everything is made up of the atom. But atom, in the in the Greek idea, means basically a. Remember that when you have a, that means no or without. And tomos in Greek means division. So the atom is something that cannot be divided anymore. He's thinking that you can divide and divide and divide things until you get to a point where you cannot divide these things anymore, and that point is the atom. So the atom has no division, and Democritus is thinking that everything is made from this thing that cannot be divided anymore. But after the Pre-Socratic philosophers that basically existed in the 5th century before Christ, then we are going to have the Socratic philosophers. And basically, the Socratic philosophers are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We do not have anything written by Socrates again because his way of developing his ideas was to speak in public, going in Athens in public and speaking and trying to convince people to think. But there are some people that do not want you to think, right? They just want you to repeat what other people already say, or they just want you to repeat what the book says. And Socrates, of course, was trying to make people think. And that wasn't good for the Athenian society, so they commanded his death. And he had to kill himself by drinking poison. And there is this very, very sad dialogue of Plato. I don't quite remember the name. I think it was Banquet. He has a lot of dialogues, and every single dialogue is trying to explain a different philosophical problem. I think it is Banquet where the end of Socrates is told, and it is such a sad episode because he was such a great guy all the way until the end. So Socrates didn't write anything, and Plato certainly was not going to risk being killed as Socrates was. So all the dialogues that he wrote them in such a way that it seemed like everything that he was writing was said originally by Socrates. So his dialogues are always Socrates fighting other people and convincing them that they are wrong and that they are seeing things in the wrong way. But that makes it very difficult for us to see the border and to see the division between what Plato was thinking and what Socrates was thinking. Because Plato is expressing all his ideas and pretending that they were Socrates' ideas. So in this case, they cannot kill him as they killed Socrates, because he is just saying, well, these are not my ideas. I am just writing what Socrates said, and you already killed Socrates, so there is no more to it. Now, Aristotle was, again, not from Athens. This is Athens. Aristotle was here from Stagira. So, Aristotle is going to become Plato's student, but he is going to soar past Plato. He's going to become quite a better philosopher than him. So here we have a painting where they represent Plato, the old master, and he is holding one of his books, one of his dialogues. It says Timeo. I love this book. I use this dialogue a lot because this dialogue is speaking about time. In this dialogue, Plato is researching the problem about time. And you have Aristotle, the youngest student, that is holding one of his most famous books about ethics. He has a book, the Metaphysics, where he fights directly the ideas of Plato. So even if Aristotle was the student of Plato, they had very different ideas. And you can see them really summarized here in this picture. Plato was looking for the explanation of things upside. His theory is based on ideas. He thinks that the only thing that really exists are ideas, that ideas are the perfect model, and that the things that we can see in reality are just imperfect representations of these models. Now, Aristotle is not thinking that way. He thinks that we shouldn't be looking for the explanation in this other world or kingdom of the ideas, but that we should be looking for the explanation of things down here on earth, on physical reality. So we can summarize Plato's ideas like this. He is thinking that the thing that really exists are ideas, and that the things that you are able to see with your senses are just imperfect representations of those ideas. And that in that case, you never learn anything because ideas already exist. You just remember because the ideas were already there. So, philosophy, right? But Aristotle is not doing that. Aristotle is saying, Well, no, what we should do is study things, study the elements that make up those things, study the relations between those elements, and that is how we're going to be able to explain things. Not about thinking about the idea of it, but but by thinking about the thing itself. How is the thing built? How is the thing working? And actually, that is the word that he uses, the thing, la cosa. It is really funny to read his books. Well, he's a great philosopher. He is the guy that develops logic as a study of philosophy. Um, so this is very interesting, and this is the last part of our review on philosophy. You have discussed the idea of these two philosophers, Heraclitus and Parmenides. Well, what Plato did precisely in his book Timeo is that he took together the ideas of Heraclitus and Parmenides. He said, okay, Parmenides is saying that things never change. So Plato is going to call that eternity. And Heraclitus is going to say that everything is changing. And he's going to call that time. So for Plato, time, and actually that stands still nowadays, time was change, while eternity was permanence or no change, right? Permanence, sorry, I'm going to finish it here. Permanence, it is not changing. So if we follow his theory of the world of the ideas, it is very interesting because what is the perfect model? Eternity. And what is the imperfect model that we are able to see with our senses? Time, change. So he is integrating the ideas both of Heraclitus and of Parmenides in his book Timaeus. Then Aristotle, that is his student, he is also going to be discussing what is time. If time is the distance between two events, what can we say that is time? And there is this guy called Plotinus that is going to retake the ideas both of Aristotle and Plato, but he's going to add the idea of divinity. This song here means divinity. And this is funny, right? Because like the greatest achievement of these philosophers is that they are explaining things without using the notion of gods. But Plotinus, that is actually now a Roman philosopher, is going to use the ideas both of Plato and Aristotle, but he's going to join them with the idea of the divinity. And he's going to say that everything that exists is surrounding divinity and that we are all looking to the center into the thing that is divine. So, why is this the last thing that I want us to see? Well, because St. Augustine is going to read Plotinus. He's not going to read Plato and Aristotle. Not directly. He's going to read Plotinus. But Plotinus is basically using the idea of these two guys and integrating the notion of divinity. But basically the ideas are the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. So what we are going to be able to see in St. Augustine's way of thinking is basically Plato's and Aristotle's way of thinking. But it is funny because when he is writing, he is not saying, oh, I took these ideas from Plotinus. No, he's saying, God, thank you for allowing me to understand this and for giving me these ideas. So really he's not recognizing that the ideas weren't his. However, I wanted to get here because we are going to read one of St. Augustine's book together in class that is called The City of God. And when we read this book speaks about the fall of Rome. So that leads us to our next and final part of this review, the Romans. So please go to the third link in the description of this video so that you can answer a mock quiz in order to see how well you understood these topics. Okay, if you boys and girls reached this point, that means that you are almost over. You are almost ready to present your history exam. I am sure that you will be achieving this very soon. Now, I hope that you did great in your mock quiz. Remember that in order to make your mock quizzes, you need to go to the description of the videos here in YouTube. They don't appear immediately. You need to find the description of the video, and there you will find the links for the quizzes. So now I suppose that you have already solved 3 quizzes so far, right? Mock quizzes. They don't count. They are just to allow you measure how well are you doing with this. So the first one was, of course, about social organization. The second one was about the Greeks. The third one is the one that you just solved about philosophy and mythology. And finally, you're going to be solving one once we finish with our Rome topic. That will be, of course, about Rome. So let's start here. We just studied mythology and philosophy, and we said that mythology is a way to understand reality, right? It is these stories that are shared by a society. It is a way that they have in order to understand absolutely everything that surrounds them. So here, one of the most important things that a society needs to understand, needs to set in order, is their own origin. How was this society originated? So, of course, every single society has a myth of origin, a myth explaining their own origin. Mexicas have this myth about Huitzilopochtli telling them to move from Aztlan in order to find the eagle and the snake. And the Romans, of course, have the myth of Romulus and Remus. So everything starts with Aeneas, and I am sure that you are pretty familiar with Aeneas by now, because you were supposed to watch the opera of Dido and Aeneas. Dido, the queen of Carthage, and Aeneas, the prince and hero of the Trojan Wars. Now, the mother of Romulus and Remus was supposed to be a descendant from Aeneas, but she had a son with Mars. Well, actually, 2 children, right? She had her children with Mars, the god of war. And those children were Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. Now, these children were abandoned by their mother. Why? Because obviously she was married to another man. So when this man realized that she was going to have children, that she was pregnant, and that she gave birth to some kids, then, well, he felt really menaced by this, so she abandoned the kids in the forest. So the legend, or the myth, says that they were found by a she-wolf, and that this she-wolf fed them in order to allow them to survive. So here you have baby Romulus and Remus, and they are being fed by the wolf. Now, that allowed them to survive, and they were adopted by a shepherd. So a guy that is basically moving around cattle, such as cows or sheep, that is a shepherd, right? So they were adopted by this shepherd until they became of certain age, and they came to know that they were actually the descendants of all this royal lineage, and that of course they deserved to rule over the Romans. So that is the myth, right? Now, when you read actual historians, you're going to find that we consider that Rome as a state, because so far what we have are tribes, right? Rome as a state is supposed to be starting with the kidnapping of the 7 women, and you have here a painting showing how the Romans are stealing all these young women. Do you see it? The Romans, and then the fathers are heartbroken, but they cannot do anything, right? So why is this the moment in which Rome starts as a state? Well, first of all, who are these guys? They are not the Romans, of course not. They are the Latins. Those are tribes. The Latins are tribes. And the Sabines are also tribes. They live in this region of Italy called Latium. And Latium is filled with several tribes, including, of course, the Latins that are like the main society that will be making up the Romans, the Sabines, that is the other half, and also the Etruscans. For example, Tarquin, that was the last Roman king, well, he was Etruscan. So they all come from this region, and Rome will be started in this region. So they steal the women, but why do they steal the women? Well, the most common explanation for this, the most truthful hypothesis, is female infanticide. Do you remember about female infanticide? This means that various societies are going to abandon or even kill girls when they are born, because these societies believe that it is better to have male children. So if they ever have daughters, in many cases they abandon them. But that is a problem, because as we saw in the chapter of this, of the previous video about social organization, a society is basically an addition of families. So how are you going to start new families if you do not have women? Well, the Latins had to find the way, and apparently the way was to steal the women from other tribes. And these tribes are going to be the Sabines. So once the Sabines and the Latins join together permanently, that is when we say that the Roman state will start. Now remember, how is this going to happen? What's the story behind all this? Well, remember that the Latins are going to be organizing some games. They are going to be inviting the tribes that are close to them, and they're going to be telling them, yes, come, but bring your daughters and your wives so that they can see how well you're going to, how good you are at sports and how well you're going to do in our competition. So, very innocently, these people bring their wives, bring their daughters, and when they are busy competing in sports, then the Latins are going to steal their daughters, basically the young women, to have, to marry them, basically. So what is the situation here? Well, of course, the Sabines are going to start a war against the Latins to recover their daughters. But this war is going to take a lot of years, and even if the Sabines were actually winning, the Latins were already married with these stolen women. They had already married them. They have children with them. So really, remember that the ones that had the most to lose in this situation were the Sabine women, because if the Latins won the war, then they were going to kill their fathers and their brothers that are fighting to recover them. But if the Sabines would win, then they would be losing their husbands and their sons that are fighting against their fathers in order to keep their mothers and to keep their husbands, right? Sorry, their wives. Sorry. So they had the most to lose. If one side won, they were going to lose family, and if the other side won, they were also going to lose family. So it was the Sabine women who came out of the village of Rome, and they are going to be fighting in order to say, no fathers, no brothers, please stop. We don't want you to kill our husbands. We don't want you to kill our sons and daughters. So by this procedure, they're going to manage that the Sabines and the Latins actually join together. And remember that when two tribes join together permanently, that is the birth of a state. That is the only difference between a state and a tribal confederacy. In the tribal confederacy, this union is not permanent. It is only something temporary while you achieve something. But in the state, this union is going to actually be permanent. It is going to last forever as long as the state lives. So they actually achieve that, right? And they get into this union that is going to be the birth of the Romans. Now, what is going to be the original organization of this state? Well, it is actually a diarchy. What is a diarchy? When you have two people ruling. Who were these two people? Well, according to the legend, it was Romulus and the king of the Sabines, the leader of the Sabines. They two are going to be ruling together, these people, but of course they are going to, well, Romulus, as in a certain point got rid of Remus and became the only leader of the Romans, of the Latins. In this case, he's also going to find a way to get rid of the leader of the Sabines, and he is going to become the only ruler of this state that is made up from the Sabine and Latin tribes. So remember, we are going this period of the Roman kingdom. The first way of organization of Rome was a kingdom. Before the kingdom, what we had were tribes. Remember, the Latins, the Sabines, the Etruscans. But after the union of the Latins and the Sabines, what we have is a state. And the first way of organization of this state is a kingdom. The Romans had 7 kings in total, a line of succession of 7 kings. And the last king, if you remember, was no other than, as I already mentioned, Tarquin. And Tarquin was precisely an Etruscan, right? But this arrangement didn't really work for the Romans. Why? Because kings were exercising power as they pleased. They were exercising absolute powers and they had no regard for the opinion of anyone else. So by the end, Tarquin is going to be expelled from the city, he's going to die, and Rome will not have this type of centralized power in one single person for at least 500 years. They are going to avoid focusing all this power in one single person for at least 500 years. But this means that they need a new way to organize their state, and that way is going to be the Republic. The sign of the Republic, the shield of the Republic, whenever you read SPQR, that is like the name of the Republic, and it means Senatus Populusque Romanum. So basically it is speaking about the Senate, because the Senate is the most important figure in the Republic. So how is the Republic going to be organized? Well, very similar to our own Mexican Republic. We're going to have the division of 3 powers. The executive power, that is going to be directed by 2 consuls. Remember, they do not want to have only one person having all the power. So they're going to have 2 consuls. And these 2 consuls have veto power over the decisions of the other consul. What does that mean? That if one of the consuls makes a decision and the other one does not agree, then he can just veto the decision of the other consul, and this will not happen. Only if the 2 of them agree on something, then this decision will come to happen, right? If they do not agree, then they can just veto each other and nothing is going to happen. So this is a way for the Romans to balance power, to avoid having only one person in power. Then we have the legislative power, that is going to be made up basically and mostly by the Senate. At least they're going to be the most powerful ones. But remember that the Senate basically is made up of the patricians, that are the very wealthy men. But they are also going to get to a point of balance here with the tribunes. The tribunes are going to be balancing the power of the senators, but not from the side of the patricians, that are the very wealthy people, the people that have money, but the tribunes are going to be the representation of the poor people, of the plebeians. So remember, the rich people, sorry, I got lost here. The rich people are the patricians, and the poor people are the plebeians. So the tribunes are going to be in the side of the plebeians, and they are going to be trying to balance the situation of the Senate that is basically integrated by rich people, and through their authority, they are going to try to attempt at least to balance this situation. So these ones have money, these ones do not have money. They don't. So, and finally, the judicial power is going to be occupied by judges. And at least the consuls and the judges are going to be changing year after year in an attempt, again, not to focus all the power in one single person, like not to have the same people there. However, you can be re-elected, right? Like you are the consul 1 year, then you rest another year, and in the third year you are consul again. So that doesn't matter, but you need to be changing at least once a year, even if you go back to the previous one. So the republic is also a state. However, it is a state in which power is centralized in the stable institutions, but these institutions have more variety than what we have in a kingdom, because in a kingdom all the power tends to go to the king. Basically, that is the point, that the king holds all the power. But in a republic, the idea is to spread this power a bit more between all the institutions, like the Senate, like the judges, like the consuls, right? And the tribunes. So, if you want to refresh your memory about the reading that we have about the plebeians, the patricians, the consuls, and the veto, you can go to page 274 and 275. We read this in class, if you remember. Well, let's go back to this thing of the patricians. It is central here in the Roman society. Why? Well, if you remember, every single society in the world is a house, and every single house is made up of bricks. So what are the bricks in the Roman society? Well, as in every single society in the world and in history, it is family. But this family has a special characteristic that sets it apart. It is a patriarchal family. That means that it is ruled by men. And the man, or the one that is going to be on top of this patriarchal family, is going to be the pater familias. That basically means the father of family, the father of the family. So the pater familias is going to be the owner of the household, so of the house and of the lands. If you remember from what we studied in geography when we were seeing economic systems, Roman society is a slave society. The work depends on slaves. Here you have slaves working and doing everything for the Romans. Like they cannot even pour their own drinks. The slaves are pouring the drinks for them. So the paterfamilias, of course, is going to be ruling, or is going to have the property over the slaves, over the household. But remember what we studied in geography, he is basically the owner of the means of production. So that means that the paterfamilias and the patricians are the masters according to the model of the modes of production that we saw in geography. Now, he is also going to be the owner of the children. Here you have very nice Roman children, and he's going to own the wife. The wife is going to be part of the property of the paterfamilias. So the household, the children, the slaves, the wife, and even people that are living in the house, like people that go visit and are staying for a while there, they also come under the authority, and basically the paterfamilias can take any decision towards them, including about their life. So if you want to refresh your memory about the imbalances between men and women in the Roman society, you can go to basically page 228, where we explain, where the book explains what is a patriarchy. And I just want to remind you that whenever you see this thing archy, that means to rule. Archy, well, you cannot see it, right? Because it is too small. Actually, it is too big. Let me try like this. Perfect. Archy means basically to rule. So when we say monarchy, it means that one person is ruling. When we say the archy, it means that two people are ruling. In Rome, we are going to even have the tetrarchy. That means that four people are going to be ruling, and we don't really use archy for the three people ruling, because if you remember, the three people ruling are going to be the triumvirate. But basically, you get the idea. So, if you remember, and this is very important, boys and girls, and you will see how this makes so much sense. Remember that a patriarchal society basically depends on two things. Patrilocality, that means that you're going to live on the house of, well, in this case of the paterfamilias, but in general in the house of the men. So that is patrilocality. So locality in this case means where you're going to be living, right? So the patrilocality is going to, let me make this thicker. The patrilocality, or where you're going to live in the Roman society, is going to be on the house of the father. But it also, a patriarchy also relies on patrilineage. So patrilocality, where locality means where you're going to live, and you're going to live in the house of the father, but again it also implies the lineage. So again, this is going to be a patrilineage. We saw this in class, right? So what is a patrilineage? That you basically trace the family line, the lineage, the family line. Remember that we spoke in this video about clans and lineages. You trace the lineage through the side of the father. So why is this so interesting? This is actually very, very interesting. Well, because if you remember Romulus and Remus, they were descendants from Aeneas, from the side of the mother, but this is a patriarchal family. So basically we want to trace the family not through the mother, we want to trace it to the father. So in here we can very clearly see the necessity, really the need to make Mars or someone really important the father of the twins, of Romulus and Remus. Because if you only keep Aeneas, then you are only speaking about the lineage of the mother, from the side of the mother. And this is a patriarchal family. So we really need the lineage from the side of the father. So what are we going to do? Like, what is the myth going to do? Well, the myth is going to set in the lineage of the side of the father a god. Like they are going to say, well, yes, they were descendants of Aeneas from the side of the mother, but the patrilineage, the line to the father, that is the one that counts, is going to guide you directly to the god of war. You can see like the need to include a god in this situation, right? Because if not, you only have the side of the mother, and that is not enough in a patriarchal society. This wouldn't be enough to justify the importance of the twins if they just pay attention to the side of the mother. You need the patrilineage, the lineage of the father. Now, well, if you remember, we have basically three types of locality, right? Matrilocality, when you live in the house of the woman, patrilocality, when you live in the house of the man, and neolocality, that is the one that we have in our society, where marriages get their own new house when they get married. Like when you get married, you get a new home. You don't live in the house of your father, you don't live in the house of your mother, you get a new home, right? That is neolocality. And we have four types of lineages, right? Patrilineage, that means that you recognize your family from the side of the father. Matrilineage, that means that you recognize your family from the side of the mother. B lineage, that means that you recognize both sides of your family, but in a different way. You recognize some things from the side of the mother and other things from the side of the father. And in our society, what we have is called undifferentiated lineage. That means that we do not distinguish between the family of the mother and the family of the father. We recognize them both and we do not make any distinctions between them. Not like in a B lineage where you recognize both, but you recognize differences between them. You have different rights and obligations towards each side of the family. No, in our society that is undifferentiated, you do not set or you do not have different rights or obligations towards them. It is the same rights and the same obligations. Okay, so now this is the Republic, and the Republic is going to last again around grossly 500 years until we get to the first Triumvirate. Now, the first Triumvirate is, well, you know the story. The first Triumvirate is about Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. But how did this come to happen? Well, again, as we were saying, the Roman society depended absolutely on slaves. Slaves are going to be personal helpers. Slaves are going to be the ones working the fields. Slaves are going to be the ones building the roads, the buildings, and slaves are also going to be gladiators. So they are going to be fighting to death for the fun and entertainment of the Romans. So they were trained to fight to death, right? And it came a moment in which one of these slaves, that was a gladiator, Spartacus, rebelled against Rome. And he led an army of gladiators in order to defeat Rome. So by those days, the consuls were Pompey, that was such a great general. He was quite the best general of Rome. If we didn't have a Julius Caesar, then Pompey would have been the most famous general. And we had Crassus as the other consul, that was the richest man of the Roman Republic, the richest man on Rome. So it was their, let's say, it was their obligation to defeat Spartacus. But they weren't able to do it. They really were not able. Why? Because the gladiators were better trained in fighting than the soldiers themselves. So the gladiator army was much superior to the Roman army. And Rome was suffering defeat after defeat until we had this guy, Julius Caesar, coming from the side of Crassus. And together, Julius Caesar and Crassus were able to defeat the rebellion of Spartacus. However, Pompey was very smart and he said, "Oh no, I am not going to have it." And he ran towards Rome and he stole the victory from the hands of Crassus and Julius Caesar. He said, "No, it was me. I was the one defeating Spartacus." So basically, this was a huge problem because if in this model of the two consuls, you need them both to agree in order to accept any decisions. Well, Crassus is of course not going to be very happy with Pompey after what he did. And they are not going to agree on absolutely any decision. On any decision. So this is a problem for Rome. And this calls for an adjustment in the model of the two consuls. And what is going to be the adjustment? Well, they will have to accept a third consul. By having three consuls, then we're going to have the model called Triumvirate. Triumvirate means that you have three people ruling. So Caesar is going to manage to become the third consul, promising them that he was going to make the Senate accept all the legislations that they required, and that he was going to make the Senate accept everything that both Crassus and Pompey needed. However, you already know the story, we talked about this in class. Remember that his methods in order to achieve this were not very popular because he was using violence towards the Senate, the senators, in order to have them accepting this. all the legislations that both Pompey and Crassus require. So what they both are going to do, they are going to say, oops, we think that we made a mistake. Julius Caesar is becoming very threatening, he's becoming very dangerous, so we cannot have him in Rome anymore. So again, if you want to read a bit, it doesn't go very deep into anything. It is very shallow, this information, but you can have you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 extra paragraphs here, very short, speaking about this same thing in pages 296 and 297 of the book. So what are they going to do? Well, they are going to tell Julius Caesar, man, you have to go. You can choose whatever province you want, but you have to go. We cannot have you here in Rome anymore. Thank you very much for your services. So Julius Caesar, being the smart guy that he was, he chose a region just north of the borders of the Republic, in the borders with Gaul. And Gaul are the territories that nowadays we know as basically France, the Low Countries, and even a piece of Germany. It is a huge territory. So he chooses this province. Why? Because by becoming the governor of this province, he gets basically the control over the armies of this region. And, well, Gaul is inhabited by a bunch of tribes, and this is beautiful. This is the best example ever. Gaul is basically occupied by tribes that are constantly fighting against Rome, and actually even in a certain moment they invaded Rome. So what Julius Caesar is going to do is to come to this part, and he is going to use the armies of the Republic that are set in this position to conquer all these territories here that is Gaul. Now, just before I forget, remember that previous to these Gallic Wars, two things are happening. Well, first of all, the Punic Wars, in which Carthage is facing Rome. These are not the Gallic Wars, these are the Punic Wars. We only spoke about them in class. I only mentioned them. The Punic Wars that are facing Carthage and Rome. Remember that what they want is the control of the Mediterranean Sea, because the Mediterranean Sea is where you can move all your products. It is the center of trade. And as I told you, well, Carthage, and you already know Carthage very well, because this is where the Queen Dido of the opera that I asked you to watch, she was the Queen of Carthage. And Aeneas, that was the hero of the Wars of Troy, went all the way like this, right? Here is Troy. So he goes to Carthage and then he goes to Rome, right? Well, to Italy. So remember that in these Punic Wars, Hannibal is going to be fighting Scipion, and the army of Carthage is even using elephants to fight the Italians. So they were basically defeated, but suddenly Carthage decides to go back, and nobody knows why. But now, by this point, Carthage is defeated, and the Republic, or the Romans, are the most powerful people of the Mediterranean. They have the control over all of this region by this point. The second very important thing that is happening is that by the time that Spartacus is leaving his rebellion, not religion, his rebellion towards Rome, Pompey is fighting some battles here in Spain. So that is relevant because he's going to leave some of his troops there in order to set that region in peace, to avoid them from rebelling against the new control of the Republic there. So Julius Caesar is going to be fighting all these Gallic tribes. Now that all of this happened, remember, the Punic Wars was before. Do not get confused. I am only telling you this so that you know that by this moment, the Romans are basically ruling all the part of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Once Julius Caesar is expelled from Rome, he's going to go here to Gaul and he's going to be fighting the Gauls. And the Gauls, as we were saying, the Gauls were a bunch of tribes. So, as you very well know now, the main characteristic of a tribe is that they do not have a leader. So it was very easy for Julius Caesar to defeat tribe after tribe after tribe because they didn't have a leadership. So basically, it was just a matter of Julius Caesar getting there and defeating them. Until they were almost fully conquered, like Julius Caesar had already conquered all of these territories. When the Gauls say, well, we cannot have this, they are really tearing us apart, they are really defeating us. So what can we do? Well, tell me, what is a society going to do when they are faced with the problem of not having a common authority, but being in the need to fight a much more powerful foe? Well, in that case, you go from a tribe to a tribal confederacy. That is the best example possible, this one. The tribal confederacy, if you remember from the part of the video speaking about social organization, is when tribes unite under common leadership. But this common leadership is only going to exist until they are able to do whatever they want to do. In this case, face Julius Caesar. Once they achieve this goal, they finally fight Julius Caesar, then this common leadership is going to disappear. And who is going to become the common leader of the Gauls were Vercingetorix. And this statue, this picture is very nice because you can see how they are representing Vercingetorix like a savage, right? With the long scruffy hair and the long scruffy mustache. So Vercingetorix is going to become the leader of the Gauls. And Julius Caesar, if you remember, is going to be able to enclose the army of Vercingetorix within a wall. He builds a wall in order to siege the armies of Vercingetorix. So Vercingetorix is here and he cannot escape, he cannot get water, he cannot get food for his army, nothing. But now Vercingetorix is not alone. He is the head of a tribal confederacy. So Gauls coming from other parts of other tribes are going to unite in order to try to help Vercingetorix and finally defeat Julius Caesar. So what Julius Caesar does is that he builds a second wall. A wall that is going to protect him from the outside attacks. And now he is in the middle of the two walls, right? The red part is Julius Caesar and his army. Inside the first wall, you have Vercingetorix, and outside the second wall, you have the Gauls. So how is Julius Caesar going to win this battle? Well, as we saw in class, if you remember, he releases his cavalry, and when the Gauls see that the horses are coming, with the soldiers obviously, not just horses, but soldiers by horse, well, they are going to believe that Julius Caesar has surrounded them. And that is not the truth. He just let the cavalry out. But they are going to believe that Julius Caesar actually has a larger army than what they believed, and they are going to run away. So Julius Caesar is going to send the cavalry to persecute all these Gauls, and he's going to defeat them. So that basically brings an end to the Gallic Wars. Vercingetorix is defeated, and Julius Caesar conquers all the large territories of Gaul for Rome. But this is going to bring a problem. This is going to cause a problem because now Julius Caesar, and Pompey are great generals, are people that have a lot of military success, and the only one that doesn't is Crassus. So remember that Crassus is going to try to go to the Middle East, and he's going to try to go to the Middle East, and he is going, let me go back to where we were. sorry. He's going to try to go to the Middle East, and he is going to try to conquer some lands for Rome. But he is not going to be successful at all. Remember that they actually take him prisoner and they kill him by pouring molten gold into his throat. So now Croesus is dead, and that means that the Triumvirate is over. Because the idea behind the Triumvirate is that you have two people that can balance a third person that is getting a lot of power. So if Julius Caesar was getting a lot of power, between Pompey and Croesus, they could balance this power. But if Croesus is out of the equation, if Croesus is now dead, then we only have Pompey. And Pompey is going to be fighting Julius Caesar. Now there is no other option. They have to fight. And this is going to start the civil wars. Remember that a civil war is when the same people fight each other. So Pompey is going to say that Julius Caesar made all his conquests illegally, that he never asked for permission to the Senate. But this is funny because remember that Pompey was even sending soldiers to help Julius Caesar in his conquest. So Pompey is going to try to bring Julius Caesar to justice, saying that everything he did was illegal. So Julius Caesar has to come and fight Pompey. Why? Because he conquered all these territories in the hope of recovering his position as a very powerful man in Rome, after he was expelled by Pompey and Croesus. So now that he has achieved his goal, now they are telling him that he's not going to be the powerful man that he hopes anymore, but that he's actually going to go to jail, and that he's going to pay for his conquests as if they were felonies. So Julius Caesar is not going to have it. He has to move his army to face Pompey. But he cannot do it directly because remember that Pompey has a part of his army here. So if Julius Caesar just advances towards Rome, then the armies of Pompey can fight him from behind, and they are going to defeat them in this way. So he cannot go directly to Italy. The first thing that he has to do is come here, defeat the army of Pompey, and when he has defeated the army of Pompey, then go back into Italy. Now, remember that in here we have a river that is called the Rubicon River. And according to Roman law, if you cross an army with a river beyond an army beyond the Rubicon River, if you cross an army beyond the Rubicon River, you become an enemy of the state, and you are basically invading Rome. So when Julius Caesar is crossing this river, and actually you can see it here, right? Very thinly you can see it here. When Julius Caesar is crossing the Rubicon River, he's going to say his very famous phrase, "Alea iacta est," that in Latin means the luck has already been decided. So it doesn't matter if I am going to become an enemy of the state, it doesn't matter if they are going to persecute me, I need to go and fight Pompey. And the luck is already decided, the gods have already decided my destiny, so who cares, I will cross anyway. So everyone starts to run from Caesar starting in that moment. And if you remember, we read both books of Julius Caesar, we read a small passage from both books when he is telling the end of the Gallic Wars, we read it, and we also read when he's telling us personally, like remember that the books that we read in class were the books that Julius Caesar himself wrote. But once he starts advancing, remember that everyone starts to run. Nobody wants to face Julius Caesar. And Pompey in particular tries to get here in Brindisium in order to cross to Greece and battle Julius Caesar there. Why? Because he doesn't have enough men in Rome, and he can call all the legions that he has in the Middle East and in Africa to join him and help him fight Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar really needs to hurry and reach the southern part of Italy before Pompey does. However, This is not possible, and remember that Pompey gets here first. He crosses to Greece, so Julius Caesar needs to build a navy because he doesn't have any boats. So he needs to build a navy in order to be able to cross his armies to Greece. But due to time, he can only build half of his navy, and he leaves Mark Antony in charge of building the rest of the navy and then catching up with him in Greece. Long story short, Julius Caesar is able to get his whole army in Greece, and when he faces Pompey, he defeats Pompey here in Greece. So Pompey will have to run away, trying to build another army that could help him defeat Julius Caesar. And the place that he chooses to do this is here, Egypt, in the city of Alexandria. Now, remember that in this moment, Egypt is no longer Egyptian, it is no longer Persian, it is Greek. It is basically Macedonian. Why? Because remember that basically, more or less 300 years ago, Ptolemy I, the general of Alexander the Great, was the inheritor of these territories. Remember that Alexander the Great didn't have any children, so he's going to inherit his empire to his generals. The generals are going to divide the empire between each other, and the guy that keeps Egypt is Ptolemy I. But we're going to have 12 Ptolemies, and here you have the pictures. Remember that I showed you these pictures in class, right? You have the list of the 12 Ptolemies that lived as rulers of Egypt until we get to the Ptolemy the 12th that is going to decide that both his sons Cleopatra and Ptolemy the 13th have to rule. But remember that they have problems with this decision, and Egypt is also in a civil war. Ptolemy is fighting Cleopatra, and Cleopatra is fighting Ptolemy for the control of Egypt. So Pompey rushes and says, okay, I need help to defeat Julius Caesar. I cannot defeat Julius Caesar on my own. So he rushes towards Egypt, trying to get the help of the Egyptians, the Macedonians, the Greeks that are living and ruling now here Egypt. So he talks to Ptolemy, that is now no older than you. He have more or less your age. He talks to him and he tells him, please help me defeat Julius Caesar, and after we defeat Julius Caesar, I will help you to defeat Cleopatra. But Ptolemy really has his doubts, because now he can see that actually there is someone stronger than Pompey. That Pompey is losing battle after battle. He had to abandon Rome, his capital. He lost the battle in Greece, where he had a lot of more soldiers than Caesar did. So maybe Ptolemy starts to think that Caesar is the best option. So instead of helping instead of helping Pompey, Ptolemy is going to cut his head off. And once Julius Caesar gets Alexandria, reaches Egypt, and faces himself with Ptolemy in order to ask him about Pompey and to ask him for help, then Ptolemy presents Julius Caesar the head of Pompey. Of course, what Ptolemy wanted to do was to get the friendship and the help of Julius Caesar. But Julius Caesar was rather horrified by this. So instead of helping Ptolemy defeat Cleopatra, he helps Cleopatra defeat Ptolemy. And, they actually have a son. If you remember, we saw that they had a son, Caesarion. So after the death of Ptolemy, one of the other brothers is going to rule, Ptolemy the 14th. He was also a brother of Ptolemy and Cleopatra. And after him, Ptolemy the 15th is Caesarion, the son of both Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. But he's going to be the last pharaoh of Egypt. After him, Egypt disappears, okay? It is going to become a part of Rome. So, Caesar is here. He helps Cleopatra defeat Ptolemy the 13th, and now he has a very big problem. No one has been ruling Rome for a long time, and Rome is now in chaos. So he sends Mark Antony, this guy here, remember he was one of his captains, he sends him to Rome in order to set Rome, well, in order. And, well, he's facing a lot of troubles because some other peoples are, let's say, they are using as an advantage the fact that Caesar and Rome is occupied in having civil wars, so they invade part of the territories of the Republic. So Julius Caesar will have to bring his army here to the kingdom of Ponto, and he will have to fight and defeat the invaders of the Republic. And in here he also says a very famous phrase, Vini, Vidi, Vici. That means I came, I saw, and I defeated. That means that it was so easy for him to defeat his enemies in this battle that he only had to go there, see the situation, and defeat them very easily. So now that Julius Caesar finally returns to Rome, he sees that everything is quite a mess. They don't even have a calendar anymore. So one of the reforms that he makes is that he takes people, wise men from Egypt, to Rome in order to make a new calendar, a new way of keeping track of the days. Because now they didn't even have that. All the disaster and all the corruption and all the problems of the civil wars is going to destroy the capacity of Rome of even keeping track of time. So this calendar that Julius Caesar is going to set is the Julian Calendar. And it is going to work for over 1,000 years until the 13th century, where Pope Gregory starts the Gregorian calendar. So the difference are just like more or less 10 days, something like that. But again, as I told you in class, I really want you to know what is this thing about the Julian and the Gregorian calendar, because in many occasions you are going to see that they are speaking about some dates, but those dates are, they tell you, this of the Julian calendar. This is the calendar that Julius Caesar started with the help of the Egyptians. Or if they say the Gregorian calendar, this means the calendar that we use nowadays that was started in the 13th century by Pope Gregory. Okay? So the idea is that Gregory made some corrections in order to make the calendar more accurate. So now, if you want to fix all these problems, you need to get some extra power, right? So Julius Caesar is going to decide to become a dictator. He's going to become a dictator in order to have all the powers that he needs in order to set Rome in order. But of course, after some time, the senators are not going to have this. Remember that Rome doesn't want to have one single person ruling, so the senators are going to betray and kill Julius Caesar. And you can see something very brief about that in your book in page 301, when the senators that opposed Caesar are going to betray him and they are going to assassinate him in the Senate during the festivities of the Ides of March. So this is the end of Julius Caesar. But it is also the beginning of something else, because Julius Caesar was never an emperor, but after him, all the necessities, all the situation, everything is set in Rome in order to actually get an empire. And that is what we are going to see just in a moment. Well, after the death of Julius Caesar, we have a second triumvirate. Who are going to be the members of this triumvirate? Well, Mark Antony, that was the right hand of Julius Caesar, if you remember. He was the right hand of Caesar. We're going to have Lepidus, that was a senator that was in favor of Caesar. He helped Caesar in the civil war. And we're going to have Octavius. and Octavius was Caesar's nephew. But this is something very interesting. As we discussed in class, Caesar never adopted Caesarion. And remember that for the Romans, you need to be adopted even if you are a natural kid. It doesn't matter. You have to be adopted to become the next pater familias, to become the inheritor of someone. So Caesar, instead of adopting Caesarion, he adopted Octavius, his nephew. So Octavius is going to be the most powerful man in the Triumvirate. He's going to prove himself a worthy successor of Caesar. First, he's going to defeat Lepidus, because Lepidus starts to grow. He wants to get his own power, so he decides to rule over Sicily in Italy. He's going to rebel against the authority of the Triumvirate. So first, he's going to defeat Lepidus. And then he's going to move against Mark Antony. And Mark Antony was in Egypt, and he was an ally of Cleopatra. And they were supposed to be deeply in love and really have a legendary affair. So when Octavius is able to defeat their troops, remember that they commit suicide and they die. So Mark Antony is defeated by Octavius, and Octavius is going to now become the only one left. There is no going to be anyone else ruling. After he defeats the armies of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, in that moment Egypt stops being an independent kingdom and it becomes part of Rome. So remember, Octavius was very, very famous. Well, first of all, because he became the first emperor. So this is the point in which we changed the way of organization. So far, we have studied four types of organization in Rome. The tribes, like the Sabines, the Latins, the Etruscans. The kingdom, that is already a state, no longer a tribe but a state. The republic, that is also a state, and now begins the empire. So Augustus is going to be very famous for his period of peace. The period of peace that he's going to start after he defeats everyone else. Like, it is easy to have peace when you have defeated all of your enemies, right? But he is going to invest absolutely all the energy and all the money that Rome was investing in war. He's going to direct it towards Rome itself. So remember, the best way to understand what Octavius is doing here is that is the final phrase that he says right before he dies. Romam marmoriam quam latericiam accepi. It means, I leave Rome a city of marble when I received it made out of bricks. Dejo a Roma de mármol cuando la recibí de ladrillos. Dejo hecho de mármol lo que recibí de ladrillos. So that means that having received a, let's say, very simple city made out of bricks, made out of clay, Caesar Augustus is going to invest all this money and all this energy in improving the city, in building roads, in building buildings, in building monuments, in building theaters, in building absolutely everything that Rome needs in order to become the great city that it was. Now, finally, remember that from the line of succession of Julius Caesar, and remember that this is a line that is made from fiction. Remember that we studied fictions, and in this case the fiction of adoption, the one that we were saying, you need to be adopted. So in the line of Julius Caesar, we're going to have, well, of course Julius Caesar was never an emperor, but of course Julius Caesar. Then we're going to have Octavius, that is of course Caesar Augustus. After Octavius, we are going to have Tiberius, Caligula, and finally Nero. And Nero is very famous because you can read about him in the Bible, Neron. And with Nero, all the line of Julius Caesar ends. So it is very interesting because Julius Caesar being this great man, Octavius being this great emperor, we end up with people like Caligula and Nero that were so crazy, even Tiberius, right? So basically, the only really good with Romans here were these two. At least the only two people that were actually ruling Rome as it was supposed to be ruled, with a lot of strength, right? So the empire is going to last, just as the republic, more or less 500 years until the 5th century. In many cases, we didn't have enough time in the classrooms, in the classes, to get to the crisis of the 3rd century, but we are basically going to start with that the next trimester. The crisis of the 3rd century, the invasion of the Visigoths to Rome in the 5th century, the fall of the Western Empire that marks the start of the Middle Ages. So your exam is going to be up to here, and please, once you finish watching this video, making your notes, take the mock quizzes so that you can be sure that you are understanding everything that we said. And also, please do not forget that you need to upload your study guide. You need to do it by hand in your notebook. Everything that you studied in these videos that I am uploading for you, the 2 videos, I know they were very long, but well, it is a whole trimester. I need you to make your study guide by hand and take pictures of it, make a PDF file with them, and upload it into the homework that I will open called Study Guide. And with that, you are going to win some grades, but you have to deliver it. It is mandatory, okay? So thank you very much, and really good luck in your exam. Bye.